The last thing Thomas Reyes heard before the corridor went wrong was the sound of her own heels on the marble floor, even and unhurried. The way she always walked when a deposition was finished, and the only thing left to do was go home. She had given the court reporter 4 hours of careful, specific answers that afternoon. She had described documents she had personally processed, signatures she had personally witnessed, filing dates she could verify from her own case logs. She had named no one outside the direct scope of what the plaintiff's attorney had asked, because that was what her training required and what her conscience allowed. She had not lied. She had also not volunteered anything that was not hers to give. It was the same line she had walked for 7 years as a courthouse paralegal, in rooms where the air smelled of recycled coffee and old paper. And she had never once lost her footing on it. She lost it now. The man who stepped into the corridor from a side door 2 floors below the deposition suite was not a stranger. She had seen Marcus Webb 3 times in the past 8 months. Once in the gallery of a civil hearing, once in the building's lobby in a way that might have been coincidence, and once last spring at the edge of the parking structure where her car sat in spot 41. Each time she had cataloged him the way she cataloged most things. Quickly, accurately, and without letting on that she had noticed. He was mid-40s, thick through the neck, with the specific kind of stillness that came not from calm, but from coiled decision. He worked for someone. Thomas did not know who. She had not been asked about him in the deposition room, and so she had not named him. He was not coiled now. He was walking toward her at an angle that cut off the elevator. Thomas kept her pace even for 6 steps before her body gave her the honest report. Her knees were light and wrong, her mouth had gone dry, and the hand holding her briefcase had tightened to the point where the leather strap was leaving a mark across her palm. She made the calculation fast. The building had been largely cleared for the day. The security desk was 2 floors down. Her phone was in her blazer pocket. She turned toward the stairwell door on her right, got her hand on the push bar, and Marcus said, "Don't." 1 word, not loud. The kind of word that did not need volume because the person speaking it had never had to repeat himself and knew it. She pushed through anyway. She made it down 1 flight before he caught the door above her. She made it across the landing before he was on the same staircase. The parking structure was through the fire door at the bottom, and she went through it into the smell of concrete and exhaust and the orange glow of overhead lights that buzzed slightly, as if apologizing for their own dimness. Her car was in spot 41. She had 40 feet of open floor to cross, and there was no one else on the level. She knew before she was halfway there that she would not make it with her keys out and the door unlocked before he reached her. She stopped beside the rear panel of a gray sedan, put her back against it, and took out her phone. She meant to call her sister. Yolanda's number was in her contacts, under a small heart, because Yolanda was the kind of person who deserved a heart next to her name. And Thomas was the kind of person who only put them where she meant them. What her thumb hit instead, in the specific dim orange light of a parking level when her hands were not as steady as she believed they were, was the call return on the last number that had reached her phone. It was a number she did not recognize. It had come in 3 days ago, misdirected to her work line via the courthouse's forwarded business extension, and she had let it go to voicemail. The voicemail had been a single second of ambient sound, and then a hang-up. She had meant to clear it. She had not cleared it. The call connected on the second ring. She said, "I need someone to hear this," because it was the most precise sentence available to her. And then she set the phone in the breast pocket of her blazer with the speaker angled outward, and she turned to face Marcus Webb. He had stopped 6 feet away. He looked at her phone with an expression that carried a faint, performative amusement. The expression of a man explaining something obvious to someone he considered slow. "You've got no one to call," he said. "You know that, right? You've got no one who can do anything. Put the phone away." She did not put the phone away. She said, "I documented everything I observed. I did not name anyone I was not asked to name. Whatever you think I said today, I didn't say it. Then you need to sign something saying so." "I gave sworn testimony," Thomas said. "I don't sign things contradicting sworn testimony." Marcus took a step forward. Thomas did not step back, because there was a car behind her, and there was nowhere to go. And also because some part of her had decided, in the 8 months of cataloging him, across 3 separate appearances, that she was not going to give him the step. He grabbed her upper arm. He was stronger than he needed to be for the grip to work, which told her the strength was a message and not a necessity. She heard her own breathing change. She heard the phone in her pocket emit a very brief, very quiet sound, and she did not know if it was still connected. It was still connected. Dario Voss had been at his desk in the 14th floor office of a building he owned outright under a holding company when the forwarded line rang. He had taken the call because he answered every call that came through that line after hours, on the grounds that the only people who reached that line after hours were people with specific and non-trivial business. What he had heard was a woman's voice, contained, precise, and frightened in the way that competent people got frightened when their competence had run out of room. He had heard a man's voice behind it, performative and certain. He had heard the parking structure's particular acoustics, the buzzing of those orange lights, the echo of concrete. He was on the phone to Felix before Thomas had finished refusing to sign anything. Felix Calder arrived in 7 minutes, which was 2 minutes faster than the structure's distance from the office should have allowed. And the matter of Marcus Webb was handled with the same temperature as everything Felix did, which was to say it was handled without theater and without waste. Marcus left the structure in the custody of 2 men Thomas could not identify and did not need to. She stood beside her car in spot 41 with her briefcase still in her hand and her phone still in her pocket, and her knees finally did what they had been threatening to do for the past 12 minutes, which was to stop cooperating. Felix was there before she went down. He had a hand at her elbow, not grabbing, just present, and he said, "I have a car outside. There is a doctor who will see you tonight. Your car will be returned to you tomorrow." Thomas looked at him. He was trim, mid-30s, with a quality of attentiveness that reminded her of court reporters. He missed nothing and recorded everything and gave nothing away. "Who did I call?" she said. It was not quite a question. "Someone who answered," Felix said. She let him walk her to the elevator. "If you found your way here on a night when a story felt like the right thing, stay with this one a moment longer. It's worth the time." The clinic was private and clean, and on a floor that did not appear on the elevator's directory, the physician was a silver-haired woman named Dr. Osei, who examined Thomas with brisk efficiency, documented the bruising on her upper arm in 3 photographs from different angles, noted the abrasion at the palm where the briefcase strap had bitten in, and said nothing about how Thomas had come to be here or who had sent her. What she said was, "Nothing structural. The bruising will move through purple to yellow-green over approximately 10 days. You can take ibuprofen. Here is my card. Call the number on the back if anything feels wrong in the next 48 hours." Thomas took the card and looked at it. The back number was handwritten. She was driven from the clinic to an apartment on the 21st floor of a building whose lobby had a doorman who already knew her name when Felix brought her through the entrance. She did not ask how that was possible. The apartment had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked east over the city, a kitchen that had been stocked recently enough that the produce was still cold-room firm, and a set of folded clothes on the bedroom chair in sizes that were, with an accuracy that unsettled her, correct. The clothes were plain: dark joggers, a soft gray pullover, spare underwear still in its packaging, socks. She stood in the bedroom for a moment with the city behind her through the glass and the catalog of the day running in her body. The grip bruise and the scraped palm and the particular exhaustion of having held herself together in a small, frightening space for a sustained period of time. Then she went and took a shower, standing under the water longer than she needed to, one hand braced against the tile. She called Yolanda from the bedroom afterward. "Yoli," she said when her sister answered, because that was the only word she had access to at that exact moment. Yolanda said, "Tommy, talk to me." Yolanda had always had an instinct for the exact weight a single syllable needed to carry, and the word Tommy, the way she said it, contained everything. "Where are you? What happened? I am here. You are not alone." Thomas told her the facts. The deposition, the corridor, the parking structure, the call she had misdirected, the car that had arrived. She did not editorialize. When she was finished, Yolanda was quiet for 4 seconds, which for Yolanda was a significant silence. "You need me to come?" "I'm somewhere safe," Thomas said. "I don't know for how long." "Then you need me to come," Yolanda said. And that was that. She did not come that night. Thomas would not let her until she understood better what safe meant in the context of this specific safety. She lay on top of the covers in the dark, with the city glittering below, and she thought about the voice she had heard for less than a second on the open line before Felix arrived. Felix. She had not been able to hear what was being said. She had only registered the cadence. Level, unhurried, carrying the quality of someone who had already decided what would happen and was in the process of arranging it. She did not sleep well. She slept. The man himself came on the second day. Dario Voss was not what she had expected, though she had been careful not to expect anything. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, not large in the way Marcus had been large, not performing authority the way men who had borrowed it did. He was contained. He wore a charcoal suit over a white shirt with the first button open, and he sat across from her at the kitchen table with both hands visible and a cup of coffee he had poured himself from her kitchen without asking. And she found, to her own precise surprise, that she did not mind. He said, "You should know that the man from the parking structure will not approach you again." Thomas said, "How?" He looked at her. He had gray eyes, a quality of attention in them that was not comfortable to sit under, but was not hostile, the way a window was not hostile. "He has been made to understand that the cost exceeds the return," Dario said. "Who are you to him?" Thomas said. "Someone whose instruction he will follow." She sat with that for a moment. Outside, the city was doing what it did in the morning, which was to rearrange itself into patterns that looked like order from a high floor. "I called your number by accident," she said. "I know. I'm not asking you for anything. I wasn't then either." Something shifted in his expression. Not much, a degree or two. He said, "I know that too." He left 20 minutes later, before she had assembled a sufficient thank you, and the door closed behind him, with the sound of a door that had been built to close quietly. 2 weeks passed in a shape she had not anticipated. She went back to work on the 4th day, because the courthouse did not pause for her, and because sitting in a high-floor apartment watching the city was not something she was constituted to do indefinitely. Her car was in the building's garage when she woke that morning, as Felix had said it would be. Keys at the front desk in an envelope with her name typed on it. No note inside. The parking structure on Clement Street, which she had used for 3 years, had been quietly replaced by a card for a different structure, 4 blocks closer to the courthouse entrance, in a building where the lights did not buzz and the elevator had a camera in working order. She found the new card in her car's center console without explanation and used it without asking for one. The refrigerator in her own apartment was stocked on the Thursday of that second week. She had been home for 2 nights by then. Her own bed and her own kitchen and the particular smell of her own space. And she came home from a late filing to find that someone had been inside with a key she had not given anyone and had filled the shelves with the specific brands she bought at her own store and had left nothing else. No note, no displaced item, no sign of having been anywhere except the kitchen. She stood in the middle of her apartment for a long time. She was not afraid. She was not comfortable either, exactly. She was something in between that she did not have a clean word for. Felix called that evening, which she had learned was how he handled things that needed acknowledging without requiring a response. "The situation with your previous parking structure has been addressed," he said. "The card you found is valid indefinitely." "Someone was in my apartment," Thomas said. A brief pause. "The refrigerator," he said, without apology and without defensiveness, as if she had identified a logistical step in a larger plan. "I would prefer," Thomas said, keeping her voice level, "to be told before that happens again." Another pause, this one different in texture. "That is reasonable," Felix said. "I'll note it." She believed him. Felix was the kind of person whose notes meant something. It was at the end of that second week that Felix asked her to come to the office. "Not the 14th floor suite," he said, "somewhere easier." They met in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the courthouse, and he sat across from her with a folder he did not open immediately, and said, in his procedurally courteous way, that there was something she ought to know. The civil fraud case she had deposed for had involved a network of shell entities. The plaintiff's attorneys had been documenting a specific set of transactions for 18 months. Thomas already knew this. In the way courthouse paralegals knew things, through osmosis, through filings, through the particular texture of a case that had been building longer than most. What she had not known was that Dario's organization had been watching the same network from the outside, tracking the same transactions for reasons of its own that had nothing to do with the civil case, and everything to do with the fact that the network had been operating inside territory Dario considered specifically and non-negotiably his. The network's exposure through the civil case had served his purposes cleanly. Her deposition, by naming only what she had directly observed and nothing organizational, had done 2 things simultaneously. It had contributed to the case's evidentiary record, and it had kept the scope narrow enough that Dario's watching had not been implicated, questioned, or even proximate to the proceedings. She had protected him, Felix said carefully, without knowing he existed. Thomas sat with this for a long time. The coffee shop was doing its mid-morning business around them, someone ordering a complicated drink at the counter, a child making noise at a corner table. "He thinks he owes me something," she said. Felix said, "He doesn't think of it in those terms." She looked at Felix. He met her eyes with the same quality of attention he brought to everything, steady and neutral and not going to give her more than he had. "Then what terms?" she said. Felix's expression moved, a fraction, in the direction of something that was not quite a smile. "He answered the call," he said. "That is the term." She went home and thought about it for 3 days. The 4th day, she went back to the safe apartment, because there was something she had left in the bedroom closet, a silk scarf of her mother's she had been carrying in her work bag when the parking structure happened, and had set on the shelf without thinking. Felix let her in with a text ahead. The apartment was unoccupied, clean, and warm from the afternoon light coming through the east windows. She retrieved the scarf and stood at the kitchen doorframe for a moment and thought about leaving. Dario was there. He had let himself in while she was in the bedroom, and he was at the kitchen counter with his jacket off, first 2 buttons open now, making coffee with the efficiency of someone who had used this kitchen before. He looked up when she appeared at the doorframe, and he did not look surprised to see her. And she did not look surprised to see him. And the strange thing about it, the thing she noted with the specific precision she brought to most things, was that neither of them said anything for a moment that was longer than a stranger moment would have permitted. He said, "I'll make enough for 2. She said, "All right." She sat at the table. He brought the coffee and sat across from her, and neither of them performed anything, which was its own kind of charged. She told him that Felix had explained the deposition connection. He nodded as if he had expected this and was not going to pretend otherwise. "I didn't do it knowingly," she said. "I know. So we're even if we were keeping a tally." He looked at her with those even, unremarkable gray eyes. "We're not keeping a tally," he said. She wrapped her hands around the cup and felt the warmth of it move up through her palms and into her wrists, and she thought, with the particular honesty she reserved for moments when there was no one to perform for, that this man could choose anyone. His world was full of people who positioned themselves to be chosen. She was a courthouse paralegal who had called him by accident in a parking structure. She did not understand what she was inside his world, and she was not willing to pretend that she did. She did not leave for another hour. When she went, he was still at the kitchen table, and his hand was resting on the wood 3 inches from where her coffee cup had been. And she catalogued that the way she catalogued everything, accurately and without comment. She was at her desk on a Thursday morning, 11 days later, when Renata Sorrell's people took her. She had been crossing the courthouse's second-floor corridor at 9:40, a stack of amended filings under one arm and her phone in the other hand, texting Yolanda about whether Sunday dinner was still happening. 2 men she did not recognize turned into the corridor from the junction at the south end. They walked with the deliberate, unhurried quality of people who had already calculated the distance and the timing and the location of the cameras. She recognized the walk before she recognized the situation, and she had approximately 4 seconds to respond. She did not get to respond. One of the men took her arm at the elbow. The filing stack went to the floor in a cascade of paper that nobody on the empty corridor was there to see. And she was walked through a service door and down a fire stairwell and into a white panel van in the service bay, with a quickness and quietness that told her this had been done before. They zip-tied her wrists in front of her body, which she noted as a mistake on their part. Whoever had told them to take her had not told them she was the kind of person who paid attention to knots. They took her phone but left it running, which was a second mistake, because a phone left running was a phone that could be tracked. And she knew from 7 years of evidence filings that tracking was frequently faster than people expected. The van drove for 23 minutes. She counted. The room they put her in was a finished basement with good lighting and a folding table and 2 chairs, which told her this was a conversation room, not a consequence room. And she noted that too. A woman came in. She was precise in her dress and her movements, somewhere in her 50s, with an accent that placed her somewhere Thomas could not pinpoint, but noted as Eastern European in some general sense. She sat across the table with the specific confidence of someone who had been through this particular negotiation before and expected it to resolve the way it always resolved. "Your name is Thomas Reyes," the woman said. "You gave a deposition last month. That deposition intersects with matters that concern me." Thomas said nothing. "I want to understand the full scope of what you observed," the woman said. "Not what you told the court, what you observed." "I told the court what I observed," Thomas said. The woman, Renata Sorrell, looked at her with professional patience. "The man who answered the call you placed from the parking structure," she said. "You are known to him now. He visits you. You visit him. This is an opportunity for all parties." Thomas looked back at her. She felt, very clearly and without drama, the particular quality of being used as a conduit. Renata did not care about her. She was a surface Renata intended to press on in order to see what Dario would do. The whole structure of the room, the whole structure of the past 23 minutes, was a test of whether Dario's interest in her was significant enough to be leveraged. She thought about Marcus Webb in the parking structure. You've got no one who can do anything. She thought about the 2 weeks of accumulating deniable care, the refrigerator, the parking card, the handwritten number on a clinic card, the coffee made without asking. She thought about a hand resting 3 inches from an empty cup. She looked at her zip-tied wrists in her lap. She had spent 7 years cataloging the mechanics of how things were formally bound and what made those bindings hold. Zip ties held at the catch until the user understood that the stress point was not the strap, but the housing. She pressed her wrists outward against the strap once, twice, feeling for the flex, and then she brought them down hard and fast against her own hip. And the catch gave with a small, quiet crack that Renata, in the middle of her next sentence, did not hear. Thomas had her phone from the table before Renata registered that her hands were free. She hit the call button on Dario's number, the one Felix had added to her contacts in the second week with a single line of text. "If you need it." She had needed it. He answered in 4 rings. She said, "I'm in a basement. I've been here for approximately 23 minutes by my count. The woman who brought me here wants to discuss my deposition. I believe she's interested in what you do about it more than in anything I'd actually say." She heard his breathing. She heard the particular quality of a room going quiet around him, which she had learned from 2 brief encounters was what his rooms did when he made a decision. He said, "Put her on." Thomas looked at Renata Sorrell, who was watching her with an expression that had moved from professional patience into something more careful. Thomas held the phone out. Renata took it. She listened for 9 seconds and said nothing. Then she handed the phone back and said, quietly, to someone in the doorway Thomas could not see, "Stand down." Thomas put the phone back to her ear. Dario said, "Felix is 4 minutes away. Don't leave the room until he arrives." She did not leave the room. Felix arrived in 4 minutes, as stated, which no longer surprised her. He came through the door with 2 men behind him and a quality of controlled efficiency that Thomas had come to read as the organizational equivalent of a held breath, every function executing precisely and without waste. He looked at her wrists, at the broken zip tie on the floor, and at her face. Something in his expression moved the fraction it occasionally moved when she did something he had not predicted. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No," she said. "The van," he said to the men behind him, and did not finish the sentence because the men already knew what to do with the van. Renata had not moved from her chair. She was very still now, the professional patience gone, replaced by the specific quality of someone who had made a calculation confident of their own variables and discovered that one variable had not behaved as modeled. Her organization, the fraction of it present in that basement and in the logistics that had put Thomas in a van, was being quietly addressed by people Thomas could not see. She heard it happening in other rooms, in movement and in the particular absence of sound that came after movement stopped. She did not watch it. She sat in one of the folding chairs and looked at the middle distance and let Felix do what Felix did. And when it was finished, he came back in and stood by the table with his jacket still perfectly set and said, You should know that Marcus Webb is no longer available to approach you or anyone connected to you. I confirmed this 2 weeks ago. It holds." She had wondered, some part of her, and now she did not have to wonder anymore. She nodded. "And Renata Sorrell's operation," he said, "has determined that the cost of this particular approach exceeds any potential return." Thomas said, "She miscalculated what I was to him." Felix looked at her with his court reporter quality, missing nothing. "She wasn't the only one who didn't know," he said. Dario arrived 20 minutes after that, because he had been doing something elsewhere that Thomas did not ask about and did not need to know. He came into the room, and he looked at her the way he had looked at her across the kitchen table in the safe apartment, with that window-quality attention. Except that there was something in it now that was not just attention. She was standing by the time he crossed to her. She was on her own feet, the broken zip tie on the floor behind her, her phone in her pocket, and her breathing even. He stopped 2 feet from her. He said, "You broke the tie yourself?" "Yes." "You called as a choice?" "Yes," she said. "Not a reflex." Something in his jaw moved. He said, in a lower register, the kind of register she had not heard from him in any of their previous meetings. "I know the difference." He put his hand briefly against her face, the inside of his wrist at her cheek. And then he took it back. And the room continued around them, as if it had not just reorganized itself. Outside, on the street level, 3 of Dario's inner circle were present. Felix and 2 men Thomas had seen in the building's lobby over the past weeks. Men who had nodded at her in the way that suggested they had been told to register her as someone worth nodding at. Now they looked at her differently, not with ceremony, not with performance, with the specific adjustment of people who had just watched someone confirm a thing they had already suspected. Dario said, to the 3 of them, all of them together on the pavement outside a building on a street whose name Thomas did not know. "Thomas Reyes. She is covered by this organization. Anyone who needs to understand what that means can come ask me." Felix, to her left, said nothing. He had a quality of stillness that was different from his usual efficient stillness, something more like attention directed at a new fact, being integrated into a larger structure. The 2 men behind Felix adjusted their posture by a degree that was small and decisive. The fraud case closed without Thomas being recalled. She learned this from Felix via text on a Monday, a single line. "The case has concluded. No further testimony required." She read it at her desk and put her phone face down and went back to the amended filing in front of her. That was what endings looked like, in her experience. A single line, and then the work continuing. She told Yolanda on Sunday. They were in Yolanda's kitchen in the apartment on Arden Street, the one with the yellow curtains and the radiator that clicked, and the smell of their mother's cooking always somehow present, even when their mother had been gone for 6 years. And Yolanda listened with both hands around a mug and her eyes steady on Thomas's face. When Thomas finished, Yolanda said, "He told people, in front of people." 3 of them, Thomas said. "And you were standing." "I was standing," Thomas said. "I'd just broken a zip tie with my own hip. I was standing." Yolanda looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "Mama would have liked him." Thomas said, "You haven't met him?" "No," Yolanda said. "But you're sitting in my kitchen telling me about him, and you do not do that." "So?" Thomas looked at her older sister and did not say the other things. The kitchen table and the coffee, the hand resting on the wood, the 23 minutes in a van, and the 4 rings, and the choice she had made to dial as a choice and not a reflex. She did not say that she had felt, in the moment between breaking the tie and lifting the phone, an absolute clarity about where she was positioning herself, and that the clarity had not frightened her. She did not say all of this because Yolanda already knew it. This was, by Thomas's careful count, the third time they had sat in this kitchen, and Yolanda had already known the most important thing before Thomas had finished the sentence. The Sundays continued. 3 weeks after the basement on the unmarked street, Thomas crossed the threshold of the safe apartment for the first time since she had retrieved her mother's scarf. She had a key now, in the sense that the doorman knew her name unprompted, and the elevator responded to her card. And she had been invited rather than instructed, which was a specific distinction she held on to. The apartment was lit and warm. Dario was at the kitchen table with a file open in front of him and a pen in his hand. And he looked up when she came in and closed the file without marking his place. She stood in the doorway for a moment, not flinching, not hesitating exactly, taking the full measure of the threshold the way she took the full measure of most things. Honestly, and without looking away from what was actually in the room. The city was below the east windows, the same city it had always been, still full of the specific and structural failures that had put her in a parking structure with her back against a sedan and nowhere to go. That had not changed. What had changed was what the city contained, who stood in it, and where she stood in relation to him. She stepped inside. Yolanda came the following Sunday. Thomas had asked her to, and Yolanda arrived on the building step at 7 in the evening with a covered dish, and the particular quality of someone who had decided to take the full measure of the thing rather than circle it indefinitely. Felix met her at the door and offered to take the dish. Yolanda looked at him with the expression she gave most new people, warm and direct and specifically not performing warmth. And she handed it over and said, "There's more in the car." Felix went and got the rest. The evening was what it was. Thomas sat at the head of the kitchen table because Dario had set her chair there without comment. And Yolanda ate Yolanda's cooking in a safe apartment on the 21st floor and talked the way Yolanda talked. Which was to say, she found out everything she wanted to know while apparently discussing something else entirely. And by the end of the meal, she knew more about Dario than Thomas had learned in 2 months. The doorman said good evening to Thomas when Yolanda left, unprompted by her first name. Yolanda paused on the step and looked at her sister in the doorway. Thomas was standing in the entrance of a building she had once arrived at, frightened and uncertain, and had come to know as a place where the air carried a different kind of weight, organized and deliberate, and specifically oriented around her being present in it and intact. Dario's hand was resting on the counter inside, open. She had seen it on her way to the door. Yolanda looked at her a moment longer. She did not say anything, because the picture was its own complete sentence. She raised one hand in the small wave she had been giving Thomas since they were children, the 2-finger lift that meant, "I see you, you're still there, I'm still here." Thomas lifted 2 fingers back. The door stood open behind her, and she did not flinch at it.